Okay, what we're looking at today are the expressed and implied powers in the U.S. Constitution. The big, broad question is, how has Congress's power changed over time? So this is a lesson focused on how the Constitution has changed, or our understanding of the Constitution has changed over time. Not formally through the amendment process, but rather informally. And we're getting specific to how it's changed with regards to Congress's authority. So everything about Congress is in Article 1 of the U.S. Constitution. Article 1 is about the legislative powers and how they're vested in a bicameral legislature. So we'll be hanging out in Article 1 a whole lot. Very specifically, we're going to go to the list of congressional powers. You will look at Article 1, Section 8, and see it is a long section with a series of paragraphs, most of which start with the word to. And so if you look at just the very first line of Section 8, the Congress shall have the power to lay and collect taxes. The next paragraph, to borrow money. Next paragraph, to regulate commerce. Next paragraph, to establish a uniform rule of naturalization. Next one, to coin money. So you'll notice that it's just a big long list of what Congress has the power to do. And all of these powers that Congress has demonstrate the problems under the Articles of Confederation. That when the Federalists and Anti-Federalists and big states and small states and free and slave states got together, they did know that the Articles of Confederation left a federal government that was too weak. And so there would need to be some powers guaranteed to that federal government, basic ones like collecting taxes and raising an army. So this list is a good comprehensive list of the solutions to the problems of a weak government under the Articles. Now, every paragraph, the second through the 17th paragraph starts with to. It gives a specific power. But I want us to look at the very last paragraph of Article 1, Section 8. And that is the necessary and proper clause. It reads, to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers, and all other powers vested by this Constitution in the government of the United States or in any department or officer thereof. This has two names, the necessary and proper clause, and also the elastic clause. So two names for the same thing. And let's delve into this. Congress has the power to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper. So it kind of seems like a big open-ended anything else. Congress has these very specific powers, paragraphs 1 through 17, and then the 18th paragraph, and make laws that are necessary and proper. But it here gives us guidelines for determining what laws are necessary and proper. Those laws that Congress makes, they can make those laws if they're necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers. We need to know what is meant by foregoing powers. Here it means all the other powers listed. So if it says Congress shall have the power to tax, which is the very first clause, well, then Congress can make any other laws which are necessary and proper for taxing. So this is a clause that, in a sense, you could see how it would augment congressional power. And then there's debate over what is truly necessary and proper. So here are your definitions for these two kinds of powers. Expressed powers means that they're clearly written. So there's really no debate. We can see Congress has the power to declare war. Congress has the power to raise an army. Congress has the power to borrow money. Congress has the power to coin money. Some of them are very, very clear. They're written there plain as day. But what about when Congress has to make additional laws in order to do one of those things? When Congress does that, they're using what's called the implied powers. Implied meaning that they're powers taken by Congress through a reasonable deduction. So every implied power has to be related to an expressed power. So when Congress says that they have the authority to make this kind of law, they might have to justify how it relates to something in this list. Now I want to go back to when we talked about limited government. I had told you that limited government is embodied in the entirety of the Constitution. The fact that we have a written document This is the rule book for the U.S. government. Even the list of what Congress can do in some ways limits what Congress can do. We have 17 paragraphs of what Congress can do. It's reasonable to assume, well, if it's not on the list, they can't do it. The implied powers makes it so that there might be powers sort of that you could infer between the lines of the expressed powers. So expressed, clearly written, not up for debate. Implied powers, those are the ones that Congress assumes because it was necessary and proper in order to carry out one of the expressed powers. So in other words, if we could make it kind of like a math equation, if you take an expressed power and couple it with the elastic clause, what you might get is an implied power. Every implied power is derived from an expressed power when combined with the necessary and proper clause. So the enumerated powers, if you have a constitution, then you should number the 18 paragraphs right there, so down the road it's really easy for us to all know that the 9th clause is the power to establish tribunals inferior to the Supreme Court, or that the 11th clause is the power to declare war. Those should be easy for you to find. If you don't have a constitution, then what I gave you in class was a printout of the enumerated powers. And what I think you should do is on one side of your spiral, staple or paste in the enumerated powers, and then on the right side we can add details about each of those powers. Because now we're going to go through some of the enumerated powers and discuss the express side and the implied side of each clause. Okay, so the very first clause says Congress has the power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises. So what's expressed here is clear that Congress is the only body that can decide how to tax us. They have the power to tax us. It doesn't say here that you could be thrown in jail for not paying your taxes. It doesn't say that wages could be garnished from your paycheck for not paying your taxes. But for Congress to effectively collect taxes, then Congress would have to be able to punish those who don't pay their taxes, to punish tax evaders. So an implied power that Congress has to punish tax evaders seems obviously related to making it so that Congress actually can collect taxes effectively. Okay, so the first clause, Congress can collect taxes, and the implied power is that they could punish tax evaders. The third clause, we spend a lot of time on this one. It's to regulate commerce. It's often called the Commerce Clause or the Interstate Commerce Clause. And when we read it, we can see that it's clear Congress gets to regulate domestic and foreign trade, and that Congress, should do that in an impartial way. What's implied are a whole slew of powers, and that's why we talk about this one the most. So I put up 2 here, but there's a much longer list of implied powers Congress has assumed related to the third clause of the enumerated powers. Establishing a minimum wage. And banning discrimination in workplaces. Both of these powers that Congress has assumed, Congress has justified by way of the Commerce Clause. So managing businesses tend to cross state lines. Even if you think you're a truly local business, you probably get some inventory abroad, or you have customers that come from other states. So it's really hard to say that your business is truly local. So Congress has established a minimum wage. Same thing with banning discrimination in workplaces and public facilities, because people can cross state lines to visit public facilities or through work, that Congress can also regulate that business in the way that it regulates minimum wage. So the power to regulate interstate commerce, Congress, you'll want to make a note here, has really used, or you could say abused, this clause. It's kind of up to your politics there. Really used a lot or abused. Congress also has the power to borrow money, and that has allowed for Congress to establish the Federal Reserve System. Here we have, there's a whole slew of paragraphs about raising an army and regulating the armed forces. So it's expressed and clear, no debate around this. Congress has the power alone to raise and support the Army and Navy, make rules governing the military, and declare war. What's implied is if Congress needs to raise an army and they're having trouble doing that, Congress could enact a draft, which would require people to serve. That would require people to serve, possibly risk their life and die, or have to engage in war and possibly kill others. That Congress has that awesome authority to compel you to serve. That is implied, and the Supreme Court has upheld that power of Congress as a necessary and proper power in order to accomplish the foregoing expressed power of raising an army. Another one here, Congress establishes a uniform rule of naturalization. Naturalization means the process for becoming a citizen. So it's expressed that Congress, not your state, sets up the process for how an immigrant might become a citizen. But there's nothing about immigration explicitly outside of this clause. There's no rules for it. It just says Congress can set up the process for becoming a citizen. So what's implied is that Congress regulates the whole process and can regulate immigration and limit immigration. Establishing post offices and post roads. That means Congress sets up the United States Postal Service. And even though it doesn't talk about airways, we know that that the United States Congress can set up all the rules for having post offices, post roads, and even postal planes. So implied is that Congress can prohibit mail fraud and obstruction of the mail in order to protect these roads and these offices. So when we think about the implied powers, I guess what's really important to note here with these is that they all have to come from an expressed power. So when Congress has a draft, its authority to do that is derived from its authority to raise an army. Or when Congress passes laws to protect the disabled, they're going to have to justify how it comes from an expressed power in Article 1, Section 8. So here what you have is kind of a nice picture of some of the powers we already talked about. If you want to pause this to copy it down, you can, but you did get some of these in the slides previously. Okay, so back to kind of our question about how Congress has the ability to change the meaning of the Constitution. When Congress assumes an implied power and they make a law using that implication, in a sense they've changed the meaning of the Constitution. So now when we read that the Congress has the power to raise an army, we understand that includes having a draft. So Congress is sort of adding to the document, not literally through the formal amendment process adding to the document, but when they make laws that are necessary and proper to carry out the enumerated powers, and we accept those, and the Supreme Court upholds those laws, then in a sense we are adding to this document. So you know, this is a tiny document. You could think of it as a skeleton. It's just a framework for what the government can and can't do, and Congress has the ability through the elastic clause to add meat to that flesh, to add details to that structure. This slide here is about schools of thought, like if you're in Congress, what you believe is appropriate to do with your legislative power. Strict constructionists are weary of adding too much to the document, meaning that Congress should not be adding in so many implied powers, making those kinds of inferences about what Congress can do could threaten the stability of our government. So they were led by Jefferson, and the idea is stick to the expressed powers, stick to what's on the list. Congress, you can carry out these expressed powers, and when you use the necessary and proper clause, it should be done sparingly, that the implied powers are there for when it's absolutely necessary to carry out one of the foregoing powers. So strict constructionists would not want Congress to make a whole lot of laws using the elastic clause. They would say that's there really only when it is truly necessary and proper, and they'd be concerned about a legislative branch augmenting its power too much through that 18th paragraph. Liberal constructionists, on the other hand, would say, well, that paragraph was put there so Congress could make changes, so that this document could be flexible with the times. So, for example, this document, it's very small, and liberal constructionists would say if we keep it too rigid and it can't change as our circumstances, interests, as the times change, then when pressure is applied, it will snap. So we need the document to be flexible. This group, early in history led by Hamilton, it favored more of a liberal interpretation to the Constitution, a more broad interpretation of the powers. So the liberal constructionists would argue what's going to keep this document safe, what's going to keep our government safe, is its ability to change. It has to be malleable to the current needs of the time. Strict constructionists would say be careful about letting this change too much, because that could threaten our foundations. Okay, so that is over time.